welcome back to the Moonlight Game Devs podcast, the podcast where game developers share the story behind their latest game. Today I had a chat with Matt, who's developing a game called Impact. It's a first-person bullet time game. He shared some insights, among other things, into how he made the levels in his game destructible, some of the talks he had with investors on the future of his game, and the very interesting story behind how he ended up having a protagonist with only one arm. Hey Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So you're developing a game called Impact. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and perhaps also how you got into developing games?
Yeah, so I guess my background with game development is I taught middle school computer science for 4 years, teaching this language called Scratch. My formal training is just in psychology. That's what I majored in school, but I've always kind of programmed as a hobby, just modded games and worked on weird random projects. Yeah, but a few years ago, I decided to really focus on learning C++ and learning more game development. I kind of started with poking around the Open Morrowind engine. I was kind of making my own modifications of that. And I spent about a year doing that before I evolved into working more with Unreal Engine 4 because that has like a C++ backend. It's pretty much totally open source. Since then, I've really been focused on learning UE4. That's what Impact is in. And it's not my current full-time job. I currently work a job in research, but my weekends and mornings before work, I spend that time hacking away at Impact.
Was game development kind of how you taught yourself programming, or like how did you transition into becoming a computer science teacher?
I guess, yeah, gaming is what got me into game development. Like my first game project was actually, it's such a random thing. It's for the Pebble watch, which is it's like a defunct. Have you heard about that?
No, I actually don't know what that is. It sounds
no,
like
it's
watch. Is it like a smartwatch?
Yeah, it's like a defunct smartwatch company. They're super dead now. But
oh.
Yeah, it was like a really simple black and white, kind of like e-ink screen. Like the battery lasted like a week. This little simple black and white display, and it had a pretty nice cloud-based IDE that was in C. I don't think it was C++, it was C, but I just had this random idea to make a game for it, which was my first major project. And it was just like a silly, you had to try to recall the most amount of digits of pi that you could, and it would record your high score. And that was my first, and that was before I taught computer science. But after I finished that and released it, and then there was an opening at my school to teach computer science, so I figured I might as well apply for it. And then I got that job, and that taught me. Teaching kids kind of the basics of computer science. I kind of had to teach myself that as I taught it to the kids. So that's kind of what my training and comp sci is. Yeah, it was fun. It worked out really well.
That's a cool transition. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about Impact. It's a new game that's just launched the Steam page. So I think folks are not too familiar with it, but yeah, walk us through about what are some of the features there and just a little bit about what the gameplay is like.
Yeah, so the vibe that people are getting from it's like a first-person Max Payne, first-person My Friend Pedro. It's really inspired by like stylish gunfights like you'd see in John Wick, like you'd see in The Matrix. It's all about throwing the player in this crazy firefight situations where they have a range of stunts. They can dive, they can do backflips, they can kick off walls. There's wall running, and there's unlimited bullet time. So bullet time on PC, it's bound to right click. So the player has a lot of tools at their disposal, but on the other hand, the player plays as a one-armed protagonist. So the player does not have a left arm, which means there's no reloading. So there's a bit of a melee system where when you're out of ammo, you have some options to fall back on. You can throw your weapon. There's all sorts of slide kicks, drop kicks, and dodging abilities to try to scramble around and try to pick up a gun. You can kick guns out of your enemy's hands and grab them, or if you sneak up on an enemy, you can grab their handgun from their holster. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. The gameplay's turned out pretty fun. Yeah, so it's kind of like your character's got this crazy powerful moveset, but she also has these pretty strong weaknesses. So I think it makes some pretty unique gameplay.
I think it sounds really unique, especially the one arm idea. How'd you come up with that?
So that's funny. Yeah. So like a game dev behind the scenes, when I'm working on the game, I decided that I really wanted full body awareness. If you look down, you can see your body, and that presents a lot of animation challenges, especially if you're a solo dev who's just focusing on C++. All my animations so far, if they're simple ones, I can hack them together myself, UE4S and basic animation tools. But a lot of them, I've had to source animations, from animation marketplaces. So Yeah, so I was really struggling with getting reload animations to work with all the possible combinations of what the player could be doing, like reloading in a dive, reloading while wall running, reloading while looking all the way up, reloading while looking all the way down, reloading while in a flip. And it was really getting crazy. So I was like, well, what if there's no reloading? And I was trying to picture how that would work gameplay wise. Like Doom doesn't have reloading and it works, but I kind of like the strategy reloading in poses. So then I was like, well, what if only the player couldn't reload? Well, how could we justify that? Well, what if they didn't have an arm? And then from then I'm like, well, if they don't have an arm, that opens up like that just really like that was like an aha moment where I was like, well, that's a really cool, unique, trait to the character. Like why doesn't the character have an arm? What other implications does that have for the gameplay? So I just tried it out. Like I just kind of removed the arm from the model and tested out some gameplay. And like it immediately I felt it immediately worked. Like it immediately added this tension to it, and also kind of subverted a lot of first person shooter genre tropes, which I don't want to just make another generic FPS. There's so many first person shooters on the market, and if you want like a tight FPS, like I mean, if you're a consumer, you're probably just going to go for like Call of Duty. Like they have a whole team who's mastered the art of like a tight generic FPS, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like Modern Warfare is dope, but as an indie dev, I got to do something unique that a AAA dev wouldn't dare to do, and I think like a one-armed protagonist in a first-person shooter game is the kind of thing that like only an indie dev could pull off safely, I think.
I think that's a really really good reasoning behind the design because, like you said, you got to stand out in some way these days, especially.
Yeah.
Do I understand correctly? Like the main mechanic is, I guess, you grab weapons from enemies if you can't reload, or
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. So if you're out of ammo, I mean, you can throw your gun for like a last-ditch kind of stun, and then so all the guns have lights on them, which indicate the ammo count. It's like a bright emissive texture on the gun. So you can pretty easily identify where guns are in the environment and how loaded they are. So it's pretty easy for the player to like identify a weapon they want to grab, and then from there you just have to get to it safely. So typically you can wall runs are a good way to do it. So another gameplay mechanic is while you're doing stunts, you're immune from gunfire. So it's all about if you don't have a gun, you rely on your stunts to get to a gun.
Okay, that's really interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about those stunts, maybe from a mechanical sort of perspective as well.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of stunts are there, and how did you implement them? Like, did you do it from scratch, or did you have some kind of asset or something like that that you used?
Yeah, it's a mix of things. So the first stunt I implemented was like a basic dive. Like you press Q and your character. It's like a dive. Like I think Neo did it a lot. Kind of like
Yeah, in Matrix, right?
yeah, exactly. You dive and like you land in like a prone position. So that's funny. The programming is all just C++, like my stuff. So for the animations, for the dive, it's funny. I bought a sleeping animation pack for like sleeping characters. And yeah, ridiculous. And it had animations for them on there. It turned out it looks pretty good. The animations don't need to be perfect because you're just seeing it in first person, but so there's animations for stomach, side, and back. And UE4 has this really cool thing called animation blend spaces, which lets you can blend animations and set up like a parameter that drives where the blend is. So I think it's like I just have like a 360 degree, like 0 to 360 degree parameter, and that controls like 0 degrees is character on their on their stomach, 90 degrees is them on their left side, 180 degrees is them on their back, and so forth. So I use that to blend between the different things. So if the player dives backwards, they can see their stomach and legs, and as the player turns to the side, you can kind of see if you look down, you can kind of see that you're the side of your body. So yeah, the code is me. For the assets, I just kind of hacked together because there was no on the UE4 asset marketplace, there was no like diving while shooting thing. So I took the sleeping one. And then, so in UE4 also, you can blend animations together based on a bone. So from the right shoulder down, I'm blending in the holding gun animation. But then for the body, it's just the sleeping animation. And I don't need to bother with the head because that's where the camera is. You never see your own character from that perspective.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially that you use the sleeping asset there.
Yeah.
It's pretty creative as well.
Well, as a solo dev, like I'm always like using the most random assets and like just like tweaking them somehow to make it for work.
I mean, right, you wanna cut corners because obviously you gotta get creative with how are you gonna make more time for yourself by, investing a little bit of money, buying a little bit of an asset here and there, just seeing how it fits together.
Yeah.
I think it's a really smart way to do it.
Yeah.
So
thanks.
I think you mentioned, like, or at least I saw in the trailer, you have like a flip in the game as well. Like, not a lot of games do that, where you can actually do like a 360 flip.
Yeah.
Were there any challenges with doing that? Like, was there something you had to figure out? Because I would imagine if it was easy, then like a lot more games would do it because it is like an awesome thing to do.
Yeah. So the first big challenge, and thankfully Unreal Engine 4 made it reasonable. So the way like a rotator typically works with like pitch and yaw and roll, things get there's this phenomenon called gimbal lock, which it's hard to describe in words. If anyone's curious, just go to YouTube and punch in gimbal lock. But ultimately what it comes down to is when you're at extreme angles, like if you're doing a flip and you're looking straight up, when you're looking straight up in the air, the math gets crazy and some weird things can happen with the camera. So there's a mathematical concept called quaternions, which is a way of working with those rotations that doesn't suffer from gimbal lock. And the math behind that is crazy. Thankfully, Unreal Engine 4 has an FQuat structure. So what I had to do, I mean, just to implement it, I had to just go into my character motion code, and wherever I use this rotator structure, I just swap it out for quaternion. And I had to learn some basic quaternion math to make it work. It's pretty simple. There's a lot you can do just by multiplying quaternions. So I can just I think what I did behind the scenes was any given frame, I get the amount of desired mouse input from the player. And I think I convert that into a quaternion. And I think what I did was I multiplied it with the current player's look quaternion. And I think that result was just what it should be. I think it was that easy. It's been months since I've implemented it. Thankfully Epic behind the scenes had a whole quaternion structure I could use. So implementing it wasn't too crazy. Gameplay wise, it took some balancing to make it useful. And what I found is when the player's in a backflip, they get extra slow-mo, which allows them, because when you're upside down, like it's hard. It's really hard for your brain to process what's going on. So I give players extra slow-mo when they're in the backflip, just so their brain can just like figure out what the heck's going on.
So is like a flip a stunt, or what constitutes as a stunt? Because you said it has the benefit of giving the player invincibility as well? Or?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that constitute a stunt. So whenever you're in a dive, you're in a stunt. If you're in a flip, so a flip is done just by, typically in a first-person shooter, you look up, and eventually there's like a pitch limit where you can't look up anymore. And in Impact, that just doesn't exist. If you're in the air, if you're standing, there's a pitch limit. But if you're in the air, eventually you keep looking up, you enter the flip status, and that's when you go like past what a typical FPS would limit you in. So when you're in a stunt, it's indicated by on the edges of the screen. Right now, it's kind of a basic, some placeholder art. You kind of get these like speed lines like you'd see in like an anime zooming by the screen, and that indicates to the player they're in stunt mode. And so what happens then is enemies' accuracy, like it's kind of like simulating like, you kind of picture like, Neo's dodging in the Matrix and like the bullets are like zooming, like just like they just trim against his jacket because for some reason the enemies like forget how to shoot when he's doing cool stuff. So how would you then the game is, it's just when an enemy is determining their trace, if it hits the player and they're in a stunt, we just do a different trace, and we just keep tracing until we find like something that doesn't hit them. So it kind of gets this cool effect where like if the player's doing a stunt, you kind of see the bullet traces like zoom by the camera, but none actually hit.
Okay. I mean, that seems like a decent way to go about it. I think the Neo inspiration there seems to work really well for your type of game as well. One thing I want to ask about as well is kind of, you mentioned it before, your game has like the slow-mo bullet time kind of thing. Is that something you need to design with from the beginning, or is it something that's quite easy to add to the game? I'm not sure if Unreal supports it, like, or has some kind of mechanic for that. Or...
Yeah, it does. It has this global time dilation you can set. Okay. Yeah, so the bullet time to get it implemented was pretty straightforward.
Oh, that's pretty convenient.
Yeah. Sure. I definitely appreciate Epic putting that feature in.
Yeah, they have a lot of stuff that they thought about pretty early, I think, that people will want to do. Speaking of Unreal Engine as well, I mean, you mentioned that you're doing a lot in C++. Are you using the blueprint system at all? Has that been something that's been convenient here and there, or is it something you haven't really bought with too much?
No, I definitely use blueprint. So let's say I code like something in C++, like a gun. you can expose certain variables to blueprints, meaning you can change them at runtime while you're playing the game. So I can, like, let's say I have a gun and I'm trying to figure out just the right rate of fire. I can hop in the game and like just change the rate of fire without recompiling, without restarting the level, just right there, immediate feedback. That's something that Blueprints allows. So I definitely use Blueprint for that. Blueprints also, it's really nice. So for some things like making a UI, I like using Blueprints. It's because it's all very visual and I can really quickly see my changes. Like compiling a Blueprints is quicker than C++. So I like the backend's all C++, but I'll dive into Blueprints when I need to. When I need to like really fine tune player experience, that's when Blueprints helps because the iteration time is just instant.
It's always a bit inconvenient when you're programming in C++. I guess one of the things I didn't like about Unreal Engine, it takes just a really, really long time. And yeah, like you said, it's really kind of discouraging when you can just use no code and it compiles in about half the speed, maybe less.
Yeah,
pretty much instantly, like you said.
I think the trick is trying to how to like balance, like know when to use which one fits your workflow better.
Yeah, definitely. I guess another thing I noticed when watching the trailer of your game as well was like the destructible environments. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like you can destroy stuff in your game. There's all kinds of crazy feedback. So what kind of things did you do to make sure that it gives you that action feel, that kind of like Matrix does it as well, right? Where Neo, I think in the first movie, shoots at some police guys and everything about
there's a lobby scene. Everyone, all the drywalls, the marbles exploding. Yes. So to power that, there's this great plugin for Unreal Engine called Voxel Plugin, which was a no-brainer to use. The dev behind it, Voxels are his life. So he's been spending his countless, actually years now, just getting the performance tight with it. I utilize that to power the voxel system, which allows me to have, there's like a dozen characters on the screen, all with automatic weapons, ripping apart the environment. I mean, I just need like lightning fast performance. And that's worked out. That's worked out really well for me. Pretty much, I mean, everything in the world is, with some very rare exceptions, like the characters aren't built with voxels, but the entire environment is. So every environment has some amount of penetration, depending on I can even set material. So every given voxel has a material. So like a thin piece of drywall will react differently to a given round than like a sheet of steel. Different particle effects, different penetration effects, and that's all, kind of built with tools that the Voxel plugin provides me.
Yeah, so I personally never heard of it, but it sounds really awesome. So what this tool does is it lets you build the environment kind of like a modeler, or is it something that you put onto existing models and then it, sort of voxelifies them, or how can I imagine that?
It does a lot. So first I'll talk about kind of what it does out of the box, and I'll talk about how I've adapted it to what I want it to do. So out of the box, its focus and main selling point is actually for more landscapes. You can kind of you use kind of noise functions, and when you start the game, for every kind of like point in space, it samples your procedural generator and determines like what should the density of the voxel in this point be. And with different noise effects, you can kind of create, mountainous terrain. You can create, like valleys, lakes, rivers, whatever, depending on how you tweak the noise. So that's its kind of primary out of the box thing. But it also does have functionality where you can give it a model and it will voxelize it. So you can give it like a house model and it'll turn it into voxels. Those features in it are kind of work in progress though. So kind of my solution is, I have a couple solutions. What I do is I kind of write procedural voxel generators that it's kind of based on the concept of like the turtle that I don't know if you've ever learned the turtle in programming classes. I'm
not sure actually.
It's something I taught a lot in my computer science courses, but it's like you have this object in like typically it's in a two-dimensional space when I taught it in school, but you're tasked with like drawing like a cube, and this turtle has a set of instructions. It can go forwards, it can turn right, it can turn left, it can draw. And so like if you want a turtle to draw a square, you might be like, okay, go forwards, turn right, and then loop that 4 times.
You know what? I think I've actually used that exact same thing. It was with like a software that does it.
You got it, yeah.
That has this little turtle.
Yeah,
there.
You got it. So
yeah.
So what I started to do with this voxel thing is I'm able to generate different voxel shapes. So I can generate a box, I can like generate toruses, cones, whatever. So I'm able to generate these different shapes. And then what I do is I have this kind of this builder class that I wrote where I can, let's say I want to make a table. So what I do is I just write code for like, okay, spawn like a leg here, and a leg's like a box with a certain amount of dimensions. Move forwards, spawn a leg, turn right. Loop that 4 times. Okay, you got 4 table legs. And then shift up the length of the leg, spawn another box. And then that box will be like the top of the table. So with that, I expose some parameters so I can procedurally choose the material, the length of the legs, maybe the leg count, the size of the top of the table, and I could even spin it out and then maybe have like a chair builder, and then that'll have its own set of instructions, and then maybe I'll have like a dining room object that'll spawn a table to my specifications and chair to my specifications. So essentially, I build the environment out of voxels procedurally, which allows me to kind of as a programmer, it allows me to use my programming skills to create models. And B, as a game designer, it allows, let's say I decide this table is too big for a level. Well, I can just tweak the parameters in my table builder and maybe make the table smaller quickly. Which that's not necessarily out of the box with Voxel Plugin, but all the tools I needed to like tape that functionality together were there.
That sounds like a really cool way to go about it. I mean, I'm sure that I would probably consider that as well if I was making that kind of game, especially if it gives you those effects. It looks really realistic. So, yeah, we already talked a little bit about the art. You kind of said that, are you using all proprietary assets, or are you doing a little bit of modeling? I don't know, maybe you're working with a contractor or something to do some of that?
Yeah, so right now so most of the environments like these voxels, which are just like it's just code I wrote. The textures I'm using the Quixel. So Epic recently, I don't know if you know, like they bought this company called Quixel, which makes these like photorealistic textures, which is like this massive library of thousands of textures. So that's what I'm using now for textures. Right now, I'm kind of in a stage where I'm seeking funding, and if I'm able to acquire that funding, I likely will contract some texture work to kind of fit the game's stylized voxel look. But for right now, I'm pretty happy with kind of tweaking these Quixel textures that Epic's provided to Unreal users.
Yeah, and I've looked at them, and yeah, Quixel's been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I've been following them as well, but they're doing some amazing work with sort of crazy scans of environments and landscapes and stuff. It looks very amazing.
And it's incredible. Like if you use Unreal Engine 4, their entire library is free to use, like no royalties. You just pop it in your game. It's mind-boggling, the amount of content there.
Yeah, for almost free. Even the new licensing with Unreal Engine 5, I don't know if you've been following that, but you're making like I think it's like $1 million revenue. Up to then, they take no royalties as well, so they're just making it more and more appealing. Which is,
yeah.
If I was a competitor, it would worry me a little bit.
Yeah. Epic's been going crazy with like keeping their devs happy lately. Yeah, I'm really happy. Just 2 years ago, I just decided to hop into Unreal. It's been paying off dividends for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the, I guess, state of your game as of right now, and sort of your plans for the future. You're saying that you've been working on the game for 9 months now.
Yeah, correct. Yep.
So what's kind of the state, and what is your scope for the game?
Yeah, so the state right now is I have a demo that some testers use and that I've sent off to publishers, and it's got a tutorial, a couple levels, and a couple game modes. One game mode where you have to clear an enemy of all enemies, and another game mode when you have to clear an enemy, clear the level, but the rules are kind of tweaked a bit for speedrun. A set of weapons, there's a stun system, and there's like one kind of squad-based enemy type to fight against. And that's what I'm saying to publishers. You're kind of catching me in this transition phase. If you asked me a month ago what my plans were, I was going to probably release a early access to Steam some point late spring, early summer to start raising funds, and kind of depending on the kind of funds that raise, kind of reevaluate my plan. Like if it worked out perfectly, I'd reduce I currently work a full-time job. So if it worked out great, I'd reduce my working hours and focus on the game more, and then really focus on the final product, which will have like a full campaign. But kind of what's happened since I put up the Steam store page pretty recently is that publishers have started reaching out to me and saying, they're interested in partnering with me and helping with funding. So right now I'm kind of in some negotiation stages now. And kind of what I see happening with the game, it really depends on how these negotiations go. I think the ideal that I'm shooting for is that I'm able to acquire funding and then just focus on impact full time. And then the goal then would be for quarter one of next year to have the full game release on Steam. And then once that's out and stable, then focus on porting, ideally to Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks for sharing the kind of process behind developing, I guess, your business plan there.
Mhm.
When you're talking to those investors, what are some of the things that you consider in the negotiations? What are the kinds of things that are being offered? Is it mainly, talk about equity or revenue share, or is it something else? Like, do the investors have interest in maybe also partaking in impacting the design of the game, or do they pitch, some direction they want to take it?
Yeah, so their input so far has been mostly focused on the visuals of the game, which I do agree with. Like right now, like a lot of the art it's kind of like a somewhere in between like programmer placeholder art to like final product. But it definitely needs, and I agree, it needs a little bit of oomph. When they play it, they identify that they like the core gameplay loop, and then what they typically ask me is like, do you feel like the visuals are final, or are you open to influence? And I say that, and it's true. I say that I'm definitely open. Like part of my interest in working with a publisher is they have connections to professionals. So if I could work with like some sort of professional visual artist, help me shape the look of the game, that would be super. As far as gameplay, they've expressed interest in features. A particular feature that I'm excited about, and I think I'd want like publisher funding to be able to dedicate the hours to make it happen, is like a level editor. Publishers are very interested in me integrating that. So like an in-game level editor where players could make their own levels and share it. Publishers have brought that up a lot, and I've kind of told them like as an indie dev, that would be as working alone full time. In my current situation, working a full time job and working on this in the afternoon, a level editor, a robust one that's fun to use, would be with a sharing system would be tricky to pull off. But if I'm able to acquire funding and I can work on this full time, that's like a total possibility. So yeah, there definitely is. The publishers definitely, they have some input about the features they'd like to see. But I think it's been very reasonable. And I think they're kind of natural features that I think would work with like with a publishing agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also a great idea to get the community involved a little bit with a
Yeah.
feature like level editing, because obviously these kind of features are pretty successful at engaging players. Yeah, you touched a little bit about working on the game kind of part-time. How have you been staying on the ball, sort of? Do you have any tips for other people who might be thinking about, starting their own little project on the side? Maybe some tips on how you stay motivated, and what kind of helped you focus and get a Steam page launched now that's already attracting publisher attention.
Yeah. So, for me, it's everyone kind of starts off at a different point, different skill sets. But for me, in this project, what I did was I woke up before work every morning. I just identified that like that's me at my most alert, most awake, and I set an alarm at 4:30 before work every day, and I got up and I checked my Trello. I keep a Trello where I'm always kind of tweaking my plans and organizing what to attack next. And I worked on it before work every day, and I spent a lot of time over the weekends to do it. And honestly, I had to make decisions about like not sometimes not going on certain trips, or not going on maybe not like if friends are inviting me out, but I'm like riding this wave of motivation. I got this feature that I'm just about to nail. Just sometimes just being like, yeah, I got to stay in and work on it tonight. Goals help, like, by the end of this month, have XYZ features, and really doing your best to live up to it can help a lot. But I guess ultimately it's the most concrete advice that works for me is setting that alarm in the morning and just dedicating my morning to doing it. I think work on it a little bit every day at a reliable time, I think, is the magic that makes it happen.
That hits so close to home. I think it's
Yeah.
hard to. People often ask me, why are you waking up at like 6 a.m.
Yeah.
when you got work at like.
Oh, yeah. So you're the same thing? Yeah.
I'm doing the same thing, man.
Yeah.
I'm totally doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's a grind, but I think it's worked for me as well. Working up early in the morning, you're fresh. And
Yep.
I think it does help for sure. And like you said, I think having a rhythm in,
Yep.
saying I'm going to wake up, I'm going to work on this, and then it's a consistent, then
Yep.
your brain gets used to it as well.
Yeah, that's just it. Like sometimes, like if I'm stumped, like I just know that like I'm gonna wake up tomorrow, I'm gonna have a new thought that's gonna solve it, and that often happens. It's just having that, giving your brain that time that like this is programming time. You do it every day. it works. It works for me and it works for you, it sounds like. I don't know if it works for everybody, but I definitely advise people try it.
I think it depends on, I guess, at least I've been told that, there's people who have sort of their hours in the day, and that depends on the person. Like for us, maybe it's morning, but for some people, it's like some people get really active during the middle of the day, and that's their kind of peak productivity time, or it's at night. So I guess
agree.
It's on a per person basis, but I think it's important to maybe explore and find out for each individual if they're trying to do something like this. I think trying to figure out a project or something next to the side to figure out what that time actually is.
Yeah, I think the regularity is key, but like the exact time of day is a per person thing. I think you're right.
Yeah. I want to I like to wrap things up with just discussing with the developer. What was one of the biggest kind of lessons learned from just making this game? I know you're not too far into the development. You're just still seeking out funding, but perhaps there's already something that you've kind of learned, some areas of growth that you want to share with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly what we just talked about, it's that a little bit every day. I think that applies for more than just game development. I think it applies for pretty much any skill someone's trying to master or any change they're trying to make in their life. Like even if it's just a little bit every day, I think it's that consistency which helps the brain grow and helps form new habits, and like helps you. Because I think a lot of people start projects and then like they get stumped and they're like, okay, I'll take a day off. Okay, I'll take a couple days off. Okay, like what was I doing again? Like where did I leave off? Oh, maybe I should just start a new project. And that's true for more than just game dev. But I think that's a trap a lot of game devs fall into. Yeah, I think I hate to just kind of repeat myself, but it's the chipping away every day. I think that's what I've learned from this project.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, I think that's a really important takeaway. So, Matt, thanks so much for coming on. It's been great.
Thanks so much,
Good
Mark.
luck with the rest of the development of your game and
Thank you.
Finding that funding.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really enjoyed this interview. Thanks for taking the time to make it happen.
Thanks for listening to this show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a review and subscribing on whatever platform you're listening to. For more game development content, head down to moonlightgamedevs.com. I hope you have a great week and join me for the next episode.